It was the late 1970s when a quiet suburban neighborhood in Enfield, North London, was thrust into the limelight of the paranormal world. The story of the Enfield Poltergeist, which would become one of the most well-documented hauntings in modern history, all began with a family, Peggy Hodgson, and her 4 children. The Hodgson family had recently moved into their council house at 284 Green Street, Enfield, in 1977. Peggy Hodgson, a single mother, was raising her 4 children, Margaret 13, Janet 11, Johnny 10, and Billy 7, in what they thought would be a fresh start. But the home they thought would be a sanctuary was about to become their worst nightmare. One evening in August of 1977, as Peggy was in the living room watching television with her children, a strange incident occurred. Janet and Margaret were in the bedroom when Janet suddenly screamed. Rushing to her side, Peggy found her daughter visibly shaken, claiming that the furniture had begun moving by itself. Peggy initially dismissed the incident, thinking that it was just an overactive imagination, but the strange events escalated in a terrifying way. Within the next few days, Peggy began to hear mysterious noises coming from upstairs, loud banging, furniture moving, and the sounds of heavy footsteps walking across the floor. At first, Peggy thought it was just the house settling, but when the noises became more violent, she realized something was seriously wrong. The situation worsened when Peggy's children started reporting even more disturbing events. Furniture began moving on its own, and objects were thrown around the house with no explanation. One of the most chilling incidents occurred when a chest of drawers in Janet's room moved across the floor by itself. This was followed by the children's beds shaking violently at night, as if they were being rocked by an unseen force. Janet, who became the primary target of the poltergeist, was particularly affected by the strange happenings. She would often be found in a trance-like state, speaking in a deep guttural voice that sounded nothing like her own. Janet's appearance also changed during these episodes. She would often contort her body in unnatural ways, her eyes rolling back in her head, and her movements jerking as though something or someone was controlling her. On one occasion, Peggy and her children were sitting in the living room when a loud noise came from Janet's room. Rushing upstairs, they found that the room's furniture had been overturned, and Janet was standing there, apparently unharmed. But when Peggy asked her what happened, Janet simply replied, "I don't know." As the events continued to unfold, it became clear that something was haunting the Hodgson family, something that would not let them live in peace. As the haunting grew more violent, Peggy decided to seek help from the local authorities. On one occasion, a police officer named Sergeant Maurice Gross was called to the scene. When he arrived, he witnessed the family's nightmare firsthand. Gross recalled that, upon entering the house, he saw a chair suddenly move across the room without any apparent cause. He then heard loud banging sounds coming from the walls, followed by the distinct sound of footsteps walking up the stairs. The officer, who had initially been skeptical of paranormal claims, was now forced to confront the reality of what was happening in the Hodgson household. The police officer wasn't the only one to experience these strange phenomena. Over the next few weeks, other members of the local community, including neighbors, were called to witness the bizarre activity in the house, but no one could explain what was happening. The Warrens and the media attention. In the midst of the chaos, Peggy sought help from paranormal investigators to uncover the truth behind the haunting. Enter Ed and Lorraine Warren, 2 of the most famous ghost hunters in the world. The Warrens had previously investigated the infamous Amityville Horror and other high-profile cases, and their involvement in the Enfield haunting would bring national attention to the case. Ed and Lorraine arrived in Enfield in 1977, and they quickly became involved in the investigation. Lorraine, a clairvoyant, immediately felt the presence of something dark in the house. Ed, an experienced paranormal investigator, began gathering evidence through photographs, recordings, and interviews with the family. One of the most chilling pieces of evidence captured during their investigation was a photograph of Janet, who appeared to be levitating above her bed. The photo, taken by one of the investigators, showed her floating in midair, her body twisted and contorted in a way that seemed unnatural. Despite the evidence, there were many who doubted the Warrens' findings. Skeptics argued that the events were either hoaxes or the result of psychological stress on the family. Some critics claim that the Hodgsons were staging the events for attention or financial gain, particularly Janet, who had become the focal point of the poltergeist's activities. However, the Warrens, along with other paranormal investigators, were convinced that the house was indeed haunted. Ed Warren claimed that the haunting was the work of a violent poltergeist, a spirit capable of physical interactions with the environment, unlike a traditional ghost, which is often more passive. As the investigation continued, the activity in the house became even more aggressive. On several occasions, the family reported that objects were thrown with great force. Heavy furniture, including tables and chairs, were tossed across the room with no explanation. A pile of bricks that had been left outside the house was also hurled through an open window, narrowly missing the family members. At night, the family would often hear strange knocking sounds coming from the walls, as though something was trying to get out. These sounds were so loud and persistent that they were impossible to ignore. The activity reached a fever pitch, with Janet, the primary victim, becoming more and more physically and emotionally exhausted. In one particularly disturbing incident, Janet appeared to be physically attacked by the poltergeist. She was found in her room, her hair tangled and matted with what appeared to be some kind of substance. Her body was covered in scratches, and she had deep bruises that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The ghostly voices, and the possession, perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Enfield poltergeist, was the voice that came from Janet during the haunting. According to the Warrens and other investigators, Janet would frequently speak in a deep gravelly voice that sounded nothing like her own. The voice was often described as being that of an angry, malicious entity, and it would curse at the investigators and the family. The voice, which was caught on tape during an investigation, often mocked the family, calling them names and threatening them with harm. It was described as guttural and menacing, and it terrified everyone who heard it. Some witnesses even claimed that the voice sounded like a man, while others said it was the voice of an elderly woman. Many of the investigators, including the Warrens, believed that Janet was possessed by the spirit of a malevolent entity. This theory was supported by the way she would often slip into a trance-like state, during which she would speak in the mysterious voice and exhibit unnatural physical movements. She would contort her body into impossible positions, her limbs twisted in ways that seemed inhuman. As the haunting reached its peak, the Warrens brought in an experienced exorcist to perform a ritual in an attempt to rid the house of the evil presence. The exorcism, however, was not successful. Despite their best efforts, the entity continued to torment the family. The Warrens left Enfield after several months of investigation, but the haunting did not stop. Janet continued to experience disturbing phenomena, and the family lived in fear that the poltergeist would never leave. The events eventually began to subside, but the scars from the haunting would remain for the Hodgson family for years to come. The aftermath and legacy, the Enfield poltergeist case remains one of the most controversial and widely debated paranormal events in history. Some believe that the haunting was a genuine supernatural occurrence, while others argue that it was all an elaborate hoax. The family's involvement in the media further fueled skepticism. Janet, now an adult, has maintained that the events were real, despite the doubts that have been cast upon her story. She has stated in interviews that she felt powerless to stop the supernatural events, and that the experience was terrifying and traumatic. The house at 284 Green Street eventually became a focal point for paranormal investigators, and many have visited it since the haunting to try and uncover the truth. Some claim that the house still holds an eerie presence, though it has since been renovated and sold to new owners. In 2016, the story of the Enfield poltergeist was brought to the silver screen in the film The Conjuring 2, which was loosely based on the events surrounding the haunting. While the film took many creative liberties, it brought the story of the Enfield poltergeist to a new generation of audiences, reigniting interest in the chilling tale. Whether or not the events were truly paranormal, the story of the Enfield poltergeist continues to captivate and horrify those who hear it. The haunting serves as a reminder that some mysteries remain unsolved, and that there may be forces beyond our understanding that continue to lurk in the shadows. The Enfield poltergeist is a haunting that has left an indelible mark on the history of paranormal investigations. The fear, confusion, and physical manifestations of the events experienced by the Hodgson family remain a mystery, one that has captured the imagination of people around the world. Whether it was the work of an angry spirit or a case of mass hysteria, the Enfield Poltergeist remains one of the most compelling and terrifying stories of the supernatural in modern history. In 1975, George and Kathy Lutz, along with their 3 children, moved into a seemingly perfect house at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York. The sprawling Dutch colonial home, located on the scenic shores of Long Island, appeared to be a dream come true. At first glance, it was everything a family could wish for: a beautiful home with a sprawling lawn and a picturesque view of the water. However, little did they know, they were about to step into the center of one of the most horrifying and controversial paranormal investigations in history. The Lutz family's time in the house would last just 28 days, but what happened during that short period would lead to books, movies, and media hysteria, leaving the question of whether or not the house was truly haunted a point of fierce debate. But the story of Amityville begins long before the Lutz family set foot inside. The Amityville Horror did not begin with the Lutz family. In fact, the house at 112 Ocean Avenue had a tragic and violent history long before the Lutzes ever moved in. In November of 1974, the house was the site of a gruesome mass murder that would haunt its history for generations to come. Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr., the eldest son of the DeFeo family, committed one of the most brutal mass murders in American history. On the night of November 13, 1974, Butch, aged 23, killed his parents, his 2 brothers, and his 2 sisters, while they were sleeping in their beds. The bodies were discovered the next morning, with each family member shot with a .35 caliber rifle as they slept. Butch later confessed to the murders, though his defense team claimed he was suffering from demonic possession at the time. The murder shocked the small town of Amityville and became a topic of nationwide news coverage. The house was immediately labeled as cursed, and its notoriety would only grow after the Lutz family moved in less than a year later. The Lutz family's arrival, a dream home that turned into a nightmare. In December of 1975, George and Kathy Lutz, newly married, decided to purchase the DeFeo family home at a steep discount. The house had been sitting vacant since the murders, and the Lutzes were eager to start their new life. At the time of purchase, they were unaware of the house's dark past, although there were whispers in town about its violent history. The Lutzes were more focused on the future and the prospect of raising their children in a home with a waterfront view. However, from the moment they moved in, the Lutz family began experiencing strange and terrifying events. What started as a few odd occurrences soon escalated into full-blown paranormal activity. At first they chalked up the events to stress or their imaginations, but as the days went by, the bizarre incidents became impossible to ignore. In the beginning, the activity was subtle. Kathy, the matriarch of the family, reported an overwhelming sense of unease in certain rooms of the house. She felt as though she was being watched, and the air in these rooms often felt heavy, oppressive. It wasn't long before George began to experience strange phenomena of his own. One night, George woke up in the early hours of the morning, feeling cold and uneasy. As he sat up in bed, he saw a pair of red, glowing eyes staring at him from across the room. The figure vanished before he could react. He later described the sensation of being drawn to the cold spots in the house, as though an unseen force was luring him toward them. His demeanor began to change, with reports indicating that he became more irritable, withdrawn, and obsessed with the house. The children, too, began experiencing disturbing events. Their youngest daughter, Missy, claimed to have an imaginary friend named Jody. However, the description of Jody was anything but ordinary. Missy described Jody as a pig-like creature with glowing red eyes, a detail that would later contribute to the house's grim reputation. Missy was terrified by the visions of Jody, and the other children began to feel the increasing malevolence in the air. The Lutz family also began to notice physical changes in the house. A foul, rancid odor began to pervade the rooms, particularly around the area where the DeFeo family had been murdered. The smell would appear without any clear cause and linger for hours. In addition, the family witnessed doors slamming shut on their own, furniture moving without explanation, and strange unexplainable noises echoing throughout the house. The transformation of George Lutz, a man possessed. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Amityville Horror was the transformation of George Lutz. Prior to moving into the house, George had been a jovial, hard-working family man. However, as the paranormal activity escalated, George's behavior became increasingly erratic. He began to display signs of depression, isolation, and even anger. At night, George would wake up feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. He began to experience vivid dreams and nightmares, many of which involved a dark, malevolent presence. He often woke up at precisely 3:15 a.m., the time when the DeFeo family murders had occurred. It was as if something inside the house was calling to him, pulling him deeper into its grasp. His behavior began to change even further. He became obsessed with the house and spent hours cleaning it, particularly the fireplace, which seemed to attract his attention. He even claimed to hear disembodied voices calling his name. On one occasion, while cleaning the basement, he was overcome by a dark force that seemed to push him down the stairs. His physical and mental state deteriorated as the haunting continued. As the Lutz family struggled with their worsening situation, they reached out for help. It was then that they contacted famed paranormal investigators, Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Warrens had already gained significant notoriety for their investigations into the haunting at the Perron family's house in Rhode Island, as well as their work in the Amityville case. Ed and Lorraine Warren arrived at the house in 1976, and they quickly began their investigation. Lorraine, a clairvoyant, immediately sensed a dark, powerful presence in the house, and Ed set up cameras and audio equipment to document the activity. They were able to capture some of the most chilling evidence of paranormal activity, including photographs of strange unexplained figures and unexplained cold spots in various rooms of the house. One of the most famous pieces of evidence gathered by the Warrens was a photograph taken during one of their investigations. In the photo, a shadowy figure can be seen standing at the top of the staircase, its form completely unexplainable. It was later suggested that the figure was the ghost of one of the DeFeo family members, but no one could say for certain. Despite the Warrens' findings, the Lutz family continued to experience terrifying events. One night, Kathy was allegedly attacked by an unseen force. She was thrown from her bed and slammed into a wall with such force that she sustained bruises and cuts. The haunting seemed to grow more violent with each passing day, and the family's emotional and physical well-being began to suffer. After just 28 days, the Lutz family had had enough. They packed their bags and left the house, leaving behind all of their belongings. They fled in the middle of the night, terrified of what they had experienced. Despite their departure, they were forever haunted by the events that took place during their brief time in the house. The aftermath, the legacy of the Amityville Horror. The story of the Amityville Horror quickly became a media sensation. Books were written, documentaries were made, and movies were produced. The Lutz family's story was turned into a cultural phenomenon, with countless theories and speculations surrounding their experiences. Some believed that the Lutzes had exaggerated or fabricated their story for financial gain, while others felt that the haunting was a genuine supernatural occurrence. The house itself became a symbol of evil and mystery. Many people who passed by 112 Ocean Avenue claimed to feel an overwhelming sense of dread. In 1977, the house was sold to new owners, but the lingering sense of terror remained. Despite being renovated over the years, the house's reputation for being cursed persisted. In 1979, a film adaptation of the Lutz family's story, The Amityville Horror, was released. It became an instant hit, and sparked several sequels and remakes over the years, further cementing the story in pop culture. Yet, despite the sensationalized portrayals of the haunting, the question remains, was the Amityville Horror real, or was it all a carefully constructed hoax? The Amityville Horror remains one of the most famous and controversial paranormal cases in history.
Whether the haunting was the result of supernatural forces, a psychological breakdown, or a carefully planned hoax, the events that transpired at 112 Ocean Avenue continue to haunt the imaginations of people around the world. To this day, the question of whether the house was truly haunted remains unanswered, and the legend of the Amityville Horror lives on as one of the most unsettling stories of the unknown. No matter what the truth may be, the story of the Amityville Horror serves as a reminder that some places are filled with a history so dark that it may never be fully understood. The terrifying events that took place within those walls will continue to provoke questions, debates, and for some, a deep sense of unease.
Deep in the heart of Tennessee lies one of the most unsettling and enigmatic locations in American folklore, the Bell Witch Cave. The cave is closely associated with one of the most famous ghost stories in the United States, the Bell Witch haunting. The Bell Witch is said to be a vengeful spirit that tormented the Bell family for years, and the story of this ghostly entity continues to captivate and terrify people to this day. In the early 1800s, the Bell family moved into a farm located near the town of Adams, Tennessee. Little did they know that their new home was about to become the center of a chilling supernatural phenomenon that would grow in intensity, gaining national attention and becoming a terrifying part of local history. The Bell Witch haunting would continue to haunt the family, and the Bell Witch Cave, an eerie location near the family farm, would serve as the supposed source of the dark force that wreaked havoc on their lives. The haunting began in 1817, when John Bell, the patriarch of the Bell family, noticed strange occurrences in and around their home. Initially, these disturbances were minor, a rattling sound in the walls, scratching noises at night, and the sudden appearance of mysterious lights. But soon, these events escalated, becoming far more sinister and terrifying. It started with the family's youngest daughter, Betsy Bell. She was the first to experience strange phenomena, including being physically attacked by an unseen force. Betsy would often report being slapped, pinched, or scratched by an invisible entity, and she would wake up with unexplained bruises. Her physical and emotional health began to deteriorate rapidly, and she became increasingly frightened. At first, the family attributed the disturbances to a prank or the work of local troublemakers, but things grew worse. John Bell began to hear strange whispering voices in his home, some of which seemed to be calling his name. His wife Lucy Bell also began to experience terrifying incidents, including hearing disembodied voices and feeling cold drafts moving through the house. It wasn't long before the entire Bell family was under siege from the unseen force that had made its presence known. The entity, which initially took the form of whispering voices, began to communicate more clearly. It would speak to the family, identifying itself as a witch. It claimed to be the spirit of a woman named Kate Batts, a neighbor of the Bells who had died some years before. According to legend, Kate Batts was wronged by John Bell in some way, and her spirit returned to seek vengeance on the Bell family. This began the legend of the Bell Witch, a spirit of fury that would torment the family for years. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the activity around the Bell family intensified. Furniture was overturned, objects were thrown across the room, and walls would shake violently. The family would hear footsteps echoing through the house, but when they went to investigate, no one would be found. Chairs and tables would move on their own, and doors would slam shut without explanation. Betsy, who had been the most affected by the haunting, was the subject of many of the Bell Witch's attacks. She would be struck by invisible hands, dragged across the floor, and even thrown from her bed. On one occasion, Betsy was allegedly slapped so violently that her cheek was left with a mark. The entity's malicious intent became evident. This was no ordinary haunting, but an angry and vengeful spirit determined to inflict harm. As the manifestations grew more aggressive, members of the local community began to take notice. People came from near and far to witness the Bell Witch's power, and the story spread quickly, capturing the imagination of the public. In fact, many people claimed to have seen the strange events firsthand, including the sight of objects floating or levitating and hearing voices that seemed to come from nowhere. It was clear that something supernatural was at work in the Bell family home. As the haunting continued, the Bells sought help from local religious leaders and spiritualists, but none could stop the terror they were experiencing. Eventually, word of the Bell Witch reached the ears of Andrew Jackson, the future President of the United States, who was then a young military officer. Jackson, known for his skepticism and his strong-willed nature, decided to investigate the haunting himself. In 1819, Jackson traveled to Adams, Tennessee, to see the Bell Witch for himself. According to reports, Jackson brought a group of his men with him, and they stayed overnight at the Bell home, hoping to encounter the entity. Jackson, who had no belief in the supernatural, was determined to uncover the truth behind the strange happenings. That night, the men experienced firsthand the power of the Bell Witch. The group reportedly heard strange sounds, like chains dragging across the floor, and saw doors open and close by themselves. One of Jackson's men was reportedly thrown across the room by an unseen force, and Jackson himself felt the oppressive weight of the spirit's presence. In fear, the group decided to leave the house, and Jackson later claimed that he believed the Bell Witch was indeed real. The incident cemented the Bell Witch as a national sensation, and the story spread across the country. The Bell Witch Cave, located on the Bell family's farm, is believed to be the source of the haunting. The cave, which sits at the edge of the property, became a focal point of the paranormal activity. The Bell Witch allegedly used the cave as a base of operations, and it was here that the spirit's power seemed to emanate from. The cave itself is a dark, foreboding place, and many who have visited it report feeling an overwhelming sense of dread and fear. The air inside the cave is heavy, and some claim to hear strange whispers or see shadowy figures moving within its depths. Some paranormal investigators believe that the cave is a portal between the physical world and the spirit realm, where the Bell Witch drew her strength. Local legends suggest that the Bell Witch herself would sometimes appear at the entrance of the cave, beckoning those who dared to approach. It is said that people who entered the cave would often experience physical discomfort or a sense of unease, with some feeling as though they were being watched or followed by an unseen force. It was rumored that the Bell Witch's power was strongest when one was near or inside the cave. Over the years, the cave has become a popular destination for ghost hunters and those curious about the Bell Witch story. Many have reported strange occurrences while visiting the cave, including the sensation of being touched by an unseen hand, hearing voices calling out, or seeing unexplained lights moving in the darkness. Despite the fear that the cave instills in people, it continues to draw visitors who are eager to experience the chilling atmosphere for themselves. The Bell Witch haunting is one of the most well-documented and enduring ghost stories in American history. Despite the passage of time, the legend continues to captivate and intrigue people. The Bell Witch's wrath reportedly subsided after several years of tormenting the Bell family, but the haunting is said to have left an indelible mark on the town of Adams, Tennessee. John Bell died in 1820, and it is believed that the spirit of the Bell Witch claimed responsibility for his death. The Bell family eventually left their home, and the haunting seemingly ceased. However, the story of the Bell Witch did not end with the Bell family's departure. Over the years, the legend has been passed down through generations, and the tale of the Bell Witch continues to be a part of American folklore. The Bell Witch Cave, still located on the Bell family's land, remains a symbol of the haunting's dark legacy. Visitors to the cave report strange experiences and feelings of dread, and the location is often the subject of paranormal investigations. The Bell Witch's story has inspired numerous books, documentaries, and even a Hollywood film, cementing its place as one of the most chilling tales of supernatural terror in the world. The story of the Bell Witch remains one of the most enduring and chilling ghost stories in the United States. The Bell Witch Cave, as the supposed origin of the haunting, is a place where many believe the spirit's dark power still lingers. Despite the many years that have passed since the Bell family's ordeal, the haunting continues to captivate the imagination of those who hear it. Whether or not the events were truly supernatural, the tale of the Bell Witch will always remain one of the most fascinating and terrifying ghost stories ever told. The Bell Witch Cave, with its eerie presence and haunting legacy, remains a place shrouded in mystery and fear,
For those who visit, the chilling specter of the Bell Witch continues to cast a long dark shadow, and it is a reminder that some ghosts refuse to be laid to rest, their spirits forever bound to the land they once haunted.
Nestled in the small town of Villisca, Iowa, stands a house that has become one of the most infamous murder sites in American history. Known as the Villisca Axe Murder House, this property is forever linked to one of the most chilling and mysterious murders ever committed. In the early hours of June 10, 1912, a horrific crime took place inside this house, leaving the lives of 8 innocent victims brutally cut short. To this day, the murder remains unsolved, and the haunting legacy of the Villisca Axe Murder House continues to stir the imagination of those drawn to the gruesome past of this eerie location. The murders, which took the lives of Josiah and Sarah Moore and their 4 children, along with 2 young guests, shocked the small town and left the community in a state of disbelief. Despite numerous investigations and theories, the identity of the killer has never been conclusively determined, and the house, now a museum and popular destination for paranormal enthusiasts, remains shrouded in mystery. The Moore family, Josiah, a respected businessman, and his wife Sarah, along with their 4 children, Herman 11, Catherine 9, Boyd 7, and Paul 5, lived in a beautiful Victorian-style home in the heart of Villisca. On the evening of June 9, 1912, the family attended a church service, after which they invited 2 young friends, Lena and Ina Stillinger, to spend the night at their home. The family returned home around 9:30 p.m., and it seemed like a typical evening. Little did they know, it would be their last. Sometime after the Moore family went to bed, the killer entered the house. It was reported that the axe was taken from the family's own shed, and the murders began shortly thereafter. The killer attacked each of the victims as they slept, striking them with the axe while they were lying in bed, most likely unaware of the impending danger. The axe was used to bludgeon each victim, leaving horrific wounds and signs of immense violence. It's believed that the killer took his time, methodically killing each of the family members and their guests. In the morning, the house appeared quiet, and neighbors were unaware of the horrific events that had unfolded just hours earlier. It wasn't until the morning of June 10th that neighbors became concerned when they noticed the family hadn't come out of the house. The townspeople then entered the home, and the gruesome scene was uncovered. The bodies of the Moore family and their guests were found covered in blood, each victim brutally murdered with the same axe. The townspeople immediately alerted the authorities, but despite several theories and investigations, the case went cold. There were no witnesses, and the killer was never caught. As soon as the murders were discovered, Villisca was thrown into turmoil. Local authorities launched an immediate investigation, but despite numerous leads and suspects, the identity of the killer remained a mystery. The town of Villisca, once peaceful and quiet, was left reeling from the horrific crime. Many locals were convinced that the killer was someone close to the family, but no concrete evidence could be gathered. There were several suspects throughout the investigation, but no one was ever definitively linked to the crime. One suspect was a man named Reverend George Kelly, who was reportedly seen acting suspiciously near the house on the night of the murders. Kelly, who had been known to have mental health issues, was interrogated, but eventually cleared of suspicion due to lack of evidence. Other theories suggested the involvement of a transient or a disgruntled former acquaintance, but again, no clear answers emerged. The case remained open for years, and many theories surrounding the murders continued to circulate. Some have speculated that the killings were connected to an earlier string of axe murders in the region, while others believe that the crime was part of a larger conspiracy. Despite numerous theories, the identity of the killer remains a mystery, and the lack of answers only adds to the chilling legacy of the Villisca Axe Murder House. In the years following the murders, the house stood vacant for some time, its tragic history looming over it. But in the decades that followed, reports of strange occurrences began to surface. People claimed to hear strange noises coming from the house, and rumors began to spread that the spirits of the murdered family still lingered in the home. Some locals believed that the house had become cursed, haunted by the victims who had met such a brutal and untimely end. In the 1990s, the house was restored and opened to the public as a museum. It didn't take long for paranormal investigators and ghost hunters to descend upon the site. The house, which still bears the original furniture and decor from the early 1900s, became a hotspot for those interested in the supernatural. People began to report strange experiences while visiting the house, with many claiming to have encountered the spirits of the Moore family and their guests. Visitors to the Villisca murder house have reported an alarming number of paranormal experiences. Some of the most common reports include the sounds of children's laughter, voices, and whispers, particularly in the rooms where the Moore children were found. Many claim to hear footsteps when no one is around, and some have even described seeing shadowy figures moving through the house. Perhaps the most chilling reports involve sightings of ghostly figures in the rooms where the murders took place. Several paranormal investigators have claimed to have seen apparitions of the victims, sometimes appearing as translucent shapes or as full-bodied figures. These sightings often occur in the dark, and many visitors report an overwhelming sense of dread and unease while exploring the house. Others have reported feeling as though they were being watched, and several have experienced a sudden drop in temperature in certain rooms, a common indicator of paranormal activity. One of the most unsettling occurrences in the house involves the upstairs bedroom, where the Moore children were sleeping when they were murdered. Guests have reported hearing soft whispering sounds, as though the children were still talking to each other, and some claim to have felt a sense of grief and sorrow lingering in the room. There have even been instances where people claim to have felt an unseen hand brushing against their skin, or the sensation of being pulled toward the bed where the children were found. Many have also reported a disturbing presence in the downstairs parlor, where Josiah and Sarah Moore's bodies were discovered. The feeling of heaviness and oppression in this room is said to be particularly intense, and some visitors have said that they felt a deep sadness when entering. The room has a chilling energy, and it's believed that this is where the spirit of Josiah Moore may still linger, unable to find peace after the brutal attack. The Villisca murder house has become a popular destination for paranormal investigators, with teams from all over the world visiting to try and capture evidence of the hauntings. Over the years, many paranormal groups have conducted investigations at the house, using various tools and techniques to communicate with the spirits believed to reside there. One of the most significant pieces of evidence was captured by a paranormal team using an EVP electronic voice phenomenon recorder. During one of their sessions, the recorder picked up a child's voice saying, "Get out." This chilling message seemed to confirm the presence of the spirits of the Moore children, who may still be trapped in the house, unable to escape their tragic fate. Other investigators have reported strange anomalies on infrared cameras, including shadowy figures that seem to move across the rooms. Some have captured what they believe to be the image of a man in one of the upstairs windows, possibly the spirit of the murderer, or another shadowy figure connected to the crimes. The evidence collected over the years has been both compelling and terrifying, leading many to believe that the Villisca murder house is indeed haunted by the spirits of the murdered family. The Villisca murder house remains a grim reminder of the violence and tragedy that struck the Moore family and their guests. The case of the murders has never been solved, and the house, now a museum, continues to serve as a focal point for both historical and paranormal interest. The dark legacy of the house has drawn ghost hunters, tourists, and curious onlookers, all eager to uncover the truth behind the hauntings and to try and make sense of the horrific crime that occurred within its walls. Despite the continued interest in the house and the murders, the Villisca murder house stands as a somber testament to the fragility of life and the haunting memories of a crime that was never truly solved. The victims, their families, and the town of Villisca will forever be bound to the legacy of the murders, and the house remains a place where the past refuses to be forgotten. The Villisca murder house is not just a tourist attraction, it is a chilling reminder of a dark chapter in American history. The brutal murders, the unsolved mystery, and the eerie hauntings that continue to this day ensure that the house will never be forgotten. Whether the hauntings are the result of genuine paranormal activity or a collective trauma passed down through the generations, the Villisca murder house remains a site that continues to captivate and terrify those who dare to enter its haunted halls. The dark legacy of the Villisca murder house is one that will never fade, leaving behind a mystery that, despite decades of investigation, has yet to be solved. Tucked away in the rolling hills of St. Francisville, Louisiana, is a plantation that has become notorious for its chilling reputation and mysterious past. Known as the Myrtles Plantation, this stunning estate, built in 1796, is one of the most haunted houses in the United States. Its tragic history, combined with eerie reports of ghostly encounters, has captured the imaginations of those who dare to explore its grounds. To this day, visitors from all over the world flock to the Myrtles Plantation in search of answers to the paranormal phenomena that seem to haunt its halls. But while the plantation is famous for its supernatural occurrences, its history is equally dark and tragic. Behind the beautiful facade of the Myrtles Plantation lies a tale of betrayal, violence, and suffering, and the spirits of the past are said to linger, trapped within the house's walls. The plantation's haunted reputation has made it an enduring symbol of Louisiana's eerie history, where the boundary between the living and the dead seems to blur. The Myrtles Plantation was constructed in 1796 by a wealthy banker named David Bradford. It was originally a large, luxurious estate, and over the years it passed through several owners. Bradford's vision for the property was one of grandeur and prosperity, and he oversaw the construction of the stately manor that would later become infamous for its haunted reputation. The plantation was named after the crepe myrtle trees that lined the grounds, adding a touch of beauty and serenity to the otherwise ominous estate. In its early days, the plantation thrived as a cotton and sugarcane farm, relying heavily on slave labor. The lush, sprawling grounds and the stately home hid a dark undercurrent of violence and tragedy, events that would eventually lead to the plantation's ghostly legacy. Though it would eventually change hands many times, the Myrtles Plantation was forever marked by a particular tragedy: the story of Chloe, a slave who is believed to have cursed the land with her vengeful spirit. One of the most well-known and chilling stories surrounding the Myrtles Plantation involves Chloe, a slave woman who is said to have served the plantation's owner Clark Woodruff and his family. According to legend, Chloe was the house servant who worked closely with the Woodruff family, particularly with Sarah Woodruff, the wife of the plantation's owner. Chloe was reportedly a beautiful young woman, but she was also believed to be involved in an affair with Clark Woodruff. The exact details of this relationship remain unclear, but it is suggested that Chloe had become infatuated with the master of the house. Her affection for Clark eventually led to her feeling betrayed and rejected when he began to favor other women, especially his wife Sarah. Angry and frustrated, Chloe allegedly decided to take matters into her own hands. To get revenge, she is said to have poisoned the family. She baked a cake, using oleander, a poisonous plant, to make it lethal. The cake was served to Sarah Woodruff and her children, resulting in their tragic deaths. After Sarah and her children succumbed to the poison, Chloe was reportedly caught and executed by the other slaves on the plantation. It is said that Chloe's actions were driven by a desire to gain favor with Clark Woodruff, but in the end she only caused more suffering. The story of Chloe's revenge and her execution by the other slaves became part of the dark lore surrounding the Myrtles Plantation, and many believe that her vengeful spirit still haunts the estate. After the tragic events involving Chloe, the Myrtles Plantation was never the same. It wasn't long before strange occurrences began to plague the estate. It's said that the restless spirits of Sarah and her children, victims of Chloe's poisoning, remain trapped in the house, unable to find peace. These spirits are believed to manifest themselves in various ways, contributing to the plantation's eerie reputation. Over the years, visitors to the Myrtles Plantation have reported strange phenomena that suggest the presence of spirits. Guests staying at the plantation's guest house have experienced unexplained noises, including the sound of children laughing and running through the halls. Some have reported hearing whispers, the rustling of clothing, and even the sound of a piano playing by itself, despite no one being near the instrument. Perhaps one of the most famous and chilling aspects of the haunting is the appearance of Chloe's ghost. Descriptions of Chloe's spirit vary, but many visitors and paranormal investigators have claimed to have seen a woman in a green turban, often standing near the plantation's front door or wandering the grounds. Her ghostly figure is said to exude a sense of sadness and regret, suggesting that she is trapped in a cycle of vengeance and sorrow that she cannot escape. One of the most famous pieces of paranormal evidence associated with the Myrtles Plantation is the haunted mirror that hangs in the home. It is said to be a cursed artifact that holds the spirits of the deceased, and its history only adds to the mystery surrounding the plantation. According to legend, the mirror was part of the original furnishings of the house and has witnessed countless deaths, including those of Sarah Woodruff and her children. Visitors to the plantation have claimed to see ghostly apparitions reflected in the mirror, and some even report feeling cold spots or an overwhelming sense of dread when standing near it. Paranormal investigators have often pointed to the mirror as a focal point for the hauntings, suggesting that it may be a conduit through which spirits can enter the living world. The idea that the mirror holds the trapped souls of the Woodruff family, along with the restless spirit of Chloe, has become a central theme in the plantation's ghost stories. There have been numerous reports of people experiencing strange sensations or seeing figures in the mirror, especially when they are alone in the room. One of the most eerie accounts comes from a visitor who claimed to have seen the reflection of a young child's face in the mirror, despite there being no one else in the room. These experiences continue to add to the legend of the haunted mirror, making it one of the most famous haunted objects in the United States. The Myrtles Plantation has become a hotspot for paranormal investigators, ghost hunters, and curious visitors alike. Countless stories of unexplained encounters and eerie experiences have emerged from those who have stayed in the plantation's guest houses or toured the property. Some claim to have encountered the spirits of the Woodruff family, while others report seeing Chloe's ghost in the gardens or on the front steps of the house. One of the most common reports is the sensation of being watched, particularly when walking through the rooms of the plantation's main house. Some visitors have reported feeling as though someone is following them, even though they are alone. The sensation is said to be overwhelming, often accompanied by sudden drops in temperature or the feeling of cold, clammy hands brushing against their skin. In addition to the ghostly apparitions, visitors have also reported hearing disembodied voices, especially in the early morning hours. Some have heard the sound of children's laughter coming from the upstairs rooms, while others have reported hearing faint cries or whispers that seem to come from nowhere. These unsettling experiences have contributed to the plantation's growing reputation as one of the most haunted places in the United States. Today, the Myrtles Plantation is open to the public as a museum and bed and breakfast. The once grand estate has been restored, but its dark history and the lingering presence of its spirits remain a key part of the plantation's allure. The house, which has been featured in countless paranormal documentaries, television shows, and films, draws thousands of visitors each year, many of whom are hoping to experience the supernatural phenomena that have been reported for over a century. The plantation offers ghost tours, during which visitors are guided through the property and learn about its haunted history. Guests can stay in the plantation's guest rooms, and many choose to do so in the hopes of experiencing the ghostly activity firsthand. The experience of staying in the haunted house, or participating in a ghost tour, is said to be both thrilling and unsettling, as the line between history and the supernatural blurs in the shadow of the Myrtles Plantation. Despite the many reports of hauntings, not everyone who visits the plantation has a terrifying experience. Some guests report feeling a sense of peace and tranquility while on the property, suggesting that the spirits may not always be malevolent. However, for those who believe in the paranormal, the Myrtles Plantation remains a place where the past is never truly gone, and the ghosts of the past still walk among the living. The Myrtles Plantation stands as a haunting reminder of the past, both for its stunning beauty and its tragic, violent history. Whether it's the restless spirit of Chloe seeking revenge, the tortured souls of Sarah Woodruff and her children, or the mysterious apparitions seen by visitors, the plantation has become a place where the dead refuse to stay buried. Today it continues to be a symbol of Louisiana's dark history, attracting those who are fascinated by the supernatural, the haunted, and the unexplained. As the centuries pass, the Myrtles Plantation remains an enduring legend, a place where history, mystery, and the paranormal come together to create one of the most haunted legacies in the United States.